Well,
SB 1446.
members, my next bill is SB 1446. It passed out of this committee several years ago. I think it's needed more than ever today. You know, we've just been hearing a number of gun safety regulation bills in the committee, the Senate committee upstairs. I know you've been hearing many bills down here as well. Some of them are complex and complicated as we seek to close loopholes and define, make technical definitions. This is a very simple bill. This bill would prohibit the possession of large capacity ammunition magazines, defined as they are as holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition. These guns that can hold more than 100 rounds can allow a shooter to fire rapidly without stopping to reload. They were originally designed by the military to kill people. They're not really for target shooting, which stresses hand-eye coordination, or for hunting. If you collect trophies, you could decimate an animal with those number of bullets that can be shot. This is a bill of public safety regulation. In 1999, the legislature passed SB 23 by Senator Parada. That bill prohibited the possession of assault weapons. In that legislation, the importation, manufacture, and sale of high-capacity magazines was strictly prohibited. That meant you couldn't bring them into the state, manufacture them in the state, or sell them in the state. However, the possession of high-capacity magazines was not prohibited. And law enforcement, the folks at DOJ, the people on the street tell us the law is very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce because everybody got it from their uncle or found it in the street or whatever. So, we know the history. We know the history. Almost starting in California in Stockton in 1986 at Cleveland Elementary School. One of the reasons Cleveland Remembers is an organization in support of this bill. 106 rounds fired in 3 minutes. 5 children dead, 30 injured. Tucson, Arizona, the place where Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was injured, 19 victims in 15 seconds. 2012, Sandy Hook Elementary School, 150 rounds in 5 minutes, 26 children and teachers dead. 2015, back in California, San Bernardino, 14 dead, 30 round magazine used. And of course, last Sunday in Orlando, 49 dead, 53 injured. Members, enough is enough. There is no reason to have the possession of these high-capacity magazines. A recent poll taken by the Public Policy Institute of California showed that 57% of Californians fear a mass shooting in their area. We should not live in fear. We should not lose our children. Banning these high-capacity magazines, the possession, in addition to all the other ways they're prohibited, would be a step forward in preventing mass shootings and the deaths of innocent people, and I would ask for your support today.
Thank you. 2 witnesses, 2 minutes apiece. Good morning, Juliet Leftwich again with the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. My organization has a particular interest in this bill because large capacity magazines holding up to 50 rounds of ammunition were used in the assault weapon massacre at 101 California Street that led to the formation of our organization. I personally got involved because my former law firm was located in that building. Fact is, as Senator Hancock just said, large capacity ammunition magazines are the common thread in almost all of our nation's mass shootings, including that which occurred most recently in Orlando. Within hours, actually, of the Orlando shooting, police in Santa Monica arrested a man whose vehicle was filled with an arsenal of weapons and many large capacity magazines. He said he was headed to the West Hollywood Pride Festival. Congress banned the manufacture, sale, and possession of large capacity magazines in 1994 in response to the 101 California Street shooting. But that law had a 10-year sunset provision and was allowed to expire in 2004, despite overwhelming public support. As the senator noted, California banned the manufacture and sale of large capacity magazines in 2000, but allowed the continued possession of these items, which was at the time was covered by federal law. This bill, therefore, excuse me, fills an important gap in our state law. Similar possession bans are in effect in Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, and the District of Columbia, as well as in LA, San Francisco, Oakland, and Sunnyvale. Despite the claims of the opposition, there are not any legal obstacles to this bill. The ban on large capacity magazine possession does not violate the Second Amendment. In 2015, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected a Second Amendment challenge to Sunnyvale's ban, holding that the city was entitled to rely on evidence showing that these magazines are disproportionately used in mass shootings, as well as in crimes against law enforcement, and that most defensive gun uses involve fewer than 10 rounds of ammunition. The court also noted these possession bans had been upheld by courts throughout the country. Finally, there's no merit to the claim that that this bill would constitute an unconstitutional taking of private property without compensation. First, the state wouldn't be taking anything because under the bill, owners could sell their magazines to a firearms dealer or remove them from the state. It's not practical or possible to require registration of magazines because they have no serial numbers or other identifying marks. Second, the case law makes clear that the government may ban property that threatens public safety in the exercise of its police power. And that's distinct from the situation where the government acquires property because it's needed for public use. For example, when the government is building a freeway and needs to acquire a home that is in the way. In short, these magazines pose an undeniable threat to public safety, and this possession ban is not an unconstitutional taking. We urge you to vote aye on this measure. Thank you.
Aye. You have 1 minute left.
Amanda Wilcox, on behalf of the 27 California chapters of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. As most of you know, I'm a volunteer legislative advocate in this building. This bill is very personal to me. My daughter was killed by someone with a large capacity magazine. She was shot 4 times at point blank range. She still had her pen in her hand when she was found. The person working behind her, this was a workplace shooting, the person working behind her and another person in the room were also killed. This all happened in a matter of seconds because of the capacity to shoot many bullets very quickly. We saw that in Tucson, where the shooter had a 31, I think it was 30, he shot 31 rounds in a matter of seconds. Young Christina Taylor Green, 9 years old, with a bright future, just like my daughter, was killed by the 13th round. Had there been only 10 rounds, she might be alive today. In Sandy Hook, first graders were able to run out of the classroom when the gunman was exchanging his magazines. So had he had 10 rounds instead of 30-round magazines, more kids might be alive today. It is very clear to me that when a person has to exchange magazines, when he cannot fire so many bullets so quickly, people have a chance to escape the lethality of these mass shootings, which seem to be becoming more and more frequent. The lethality is decreased and lives will be saved. And we hear the numbers, we hear the statistics, but just to remind you, every life that's lost, there's a family behind those people, that person who are impacted forever. We need to stop the number of deaths from these shootings. I urge you to support this bill.
Thank you. Witnesses in support?
Sylvia Solis Shaw on behalf of City of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti in strong support. I'd also like to testify on behalf of the City of Santa Monica, also in support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Kosovar on behalf of the California State PTA in strong support.
Michael Arnold for the City of Long Beach in support.
Thank you, sir. Are there witnesses in opposition?
What's that? You want me to go? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the record, Dan Reed here on behalf of the National Rifle Association and the California Rifle and Pistol Association. We're in opposition to this bill. This bill would ban the simple possession of ammunition feeding devices or magazines that are capable of holding more than 10 rounds. This is an arbitrarily selected number. And there's hundreds of thousands of Californians that own millions of these that were grandfathered in through the various versions of the assault weapon legislation that has been passed over the years here. This would require the surrender of these devices or face criminal penalties for confiscation of this property. There's no public awareness in here, so a lot of law-abiding citizens who have had these devices that have been grandfathered in could become criminals overnight for something that has long been legal to possess. This was part of the federal legislation that was mentioned, and that legislation, again, was overall disbanded for its overall ineffectiveness. For that, we're in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Sam Paredes representing Gun Owners of California and the Firearms Policy Coalition. And one thing that we have an opportunity to do in this committee and some of the other committees that we testify in is that we talk about facts and we try to discuss and debate what is truthful and what isn't. And I just want to make a couple of points. To unequivocally state that high-capacity magazines are not designed for hunting and target shooting, and that such magazines are military-designed devices designed for only one purpose, as has been mentioned before, to allow a shooter to fire a large number of bullets in a short period of time, is factually incorrect. So whether you like them or not, please don't misrepresent the truth. In fact, modern sporting rifles are the single largest selling firearm platforms for competition and hunting uses in America and in California, selling well over 1 million in the recent past. And although these firearms appear to have the functionality of a military weapon, they do not. Rather, they have the capacity to fire only one round with a single pull of the trigger. It's also very important to acknowledge, and I will be acknowledging this on another bill, that according to the Roberti-Roos Assault Weapons Control Act of 1989, it states, quote, "It is not, however, the intent of the legislature by this chapter to place restrictions on the use of those weapons which are primarily designed and intended for hunting and target practice or other legitimate sports or recreational activities." Penal Code Section 12275.5. By focusing on the weapon rather than those eager to commit heinous acts, nothing will be achieved in the pursuit of public safety. Mr. Chairman and members, the vast majority of these magazines that we're talking about hold between 11 and 18 rounds. We're not talking about millions of magazines that hold 100 rounds or 30 or 50 or 60 or 36 rounds. The vast majority of magazines that are going to be affected by this are those that came standard with the firearm, that our law enforcement officers use, that law-abiding citizens use. to protect themselves. And the number of rounds that is available to that are available to for lawful use for self-protection, golly, there have been many examples. Let's take an example of law enforcement, where as many as 6 law enforcement officers in Southern California at point-blank range fired 91 rounds at a person who was a threat to them in a vehicle, and they were only able to hit him 3 times. Those high-capacity magazines, which were standard capacity magazines, were very important for them to be able to carry out their duties, and that was a whole bunch of officers. What are law-abiding citizens to do and I thank you for indulging us for a little more time, since the supporters had quite a significant amount of additional time. I'd like to end my testimony with that. We are in strong opposition. We think this puts law-abiding citizens at a massive disadvantage over the criminal element. Thank you.
Thank you. Any witnesses in opposition? Name and organization.
Sergeant Shalisa Williams, San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, in opposition.
Any other witnesses in opposition? Any questions or comments from committee members? Mr. Lowe.
Sure. Yes, I had a question for the representative from the NRA.
It's a specific question for
Specific questions as it relates to this bill, as it relates to this policy implication.
Yes. Could you come to the table?
As the gentlemen are coming up, I want to applaud the good senator for your leadership on this issue, and certainly in response and the individuals who testified in support. We want to have a comprehensive conversation related to this issue, and it is our obligation as public servants to address this issue accordingly. As we sit here, Mr. Chair, it is the Assembly Public Safety Committee, and it is our obligation to look for the public safety interests of our community. And so, having said that, I understood and heard your testimony. Do you not believe that this bill would help fundamentally save lives? Dan?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Member Lowe, you know, this, as Mr. Perez has pointed out, this does put law-abiding citizens at a disadvantage, because criminals, by their nature, are not going to follow the law. And when you hear a bump in the night, you're going to want to have as much capability as you can to go and possibly protect your family.
And can you help me understand from your vantage point on the organization, the fundamental role that you might have in opposition to these pieces of legislation? You've come back a number of times in opposition to thoughtful pieces of legislation that try to address this issue at hand, which is that of public safety in the interests of all Californians. Can you help me understand the vantage point that you might have as it relates to being opposed to all of these bills in which we follow within the Constitution and the legislative process?
Mr. Chairman, through you, and let me just be clear, you're talking about the bills that we're talking about
Make
here.
a clarification right now.
Oh, yes.
No, you're making clarification. Go ahead.
Yes.
Continue.
Thank you very much. You're talking about the bills that we're discussing here today. As you see with all these bills, they're limiting the rights of law-abiding citizens for things that they've lawfully owned for a number of years. We're not really addressing the criminal element. The things that we're trying to prevent are already illegal, and you're coming through and you're limiting different firearms, magazine capabilities, a number of different items, which are all these restrictions that are going to fall squarely on the law-abiding.
Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions or comments when I have a moment, Mr. Chair.
You want to make a comment now?
Sure. Thank you very much. On my own time, wanted to make the acknowledgement that certainly the entity that you represent, that is the NRA, continues to be here, and it is in our interest of the state and our obligation as members. I, growing up, find myself very much focused in liking guns, Cabela's and at Bass Pro Shops. But because of those recent incidents, we need to take necessary action. And so it's with that I'm in full support of our opportunities to do what is in the best interest of all of Californians. And it's not lost upon us when we walk outside and we see the rainbow flag outside of this building, the People's Building, that we cannot remember and reflect on the lives that have been lost and what we can do not only for the present and for the future. And with that, I will be supporting this bill with strong support.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Senator Hancock, you can close.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the discussion. Yes, this is the Public Safety Committee. And we do not want more victims. And we know that all the young people who died, the families that were affected, the friends that were affected, the lives that will never be the same, need this simple closing of that 1999 law, that one loophole. The federal law was legal. It sunsetted. Powerful lobbies kept it from being reenacted in Washington. We can do better in California, and I would respectfully ask you to choose life and respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Hancock. I believe the policy that you're bringing forth is good, sound policy. And yes, sometimes I even have to pray. And in that vein, in the King James Version of my Bible, in Ecclesiastes 9:18, it is written, "Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good." I believe what you're doing today falls well inside that, and that we need to be good in our souls about how we move this forward. And so I thank you for bringing this forward, and I am urging everyone to do an aye vote. Madam Secretary.
SB 1446, the motion is due pass to appropriations. Jones Sawyer?
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, aye. Melendez? Melendez, no. Lackey? No. Lackey, no. Lopez? Lopez, aye. Lowe? Lowe, aye. Quirk?
Aye.
Quirk, aye. Santiago?
Thank you, Senator Hancock. The measure passes.